Hi, you're listening to After Dinner Conversations, short stories for long discussions. What that means is we get short stories, we select those short stories, and then we discuss them specifically about the ethics and the morality of the choices the characters and the situations put us in. Why did you do this? What makes you do this? What makes us good people? What's the nature of truth, goodness, all of that sort of stuff. And hopefully we're all better, smarter people for it and learn a little bit about why we think the way we think. So thank you for listening.
So, welcome back once again to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. I am your co host, Colby, here with Ashley.
Hello.
And Jeremy.
Hi, I'm Jeremy.
And Sarah.
Hello, I'm Sarah.
Hey there. Okay, so we're not doing video this time because we don't have a good enough internet connection where we are. So, no video if you're watching it on YouTube. You're just going to get some still photo or something. Just as a reminder, we have books out. 3 now anthologies will be out by the time you hear this. We also have short stories you can get on Amazon and Nook and Kindle. And actually, we're in libraries now through Hoopla and I don't know, all the various library apps. And then we've got the monthly magazine. So check us out on what website, Ashley?
AfterDinnerConversation.com.
There you go. And that has all the links and all the stuff that you need, as well as social media links and all that. Okay, so our story today, well, I'm a little out of practice, so if this doesn't go as smoothly as possible, it's because we took a little bit of a hiatus, is Everyone's Gay in Space by Julie Sondra Decker. I don't know. Did I mention that anyone was going to brief this, or am I doing it?
You did not.
Okay, then I will.
So I think you're doing it.
So I'm doing it. Okay. So first of all, I will say that this story has one of the greatest names I think I've ever had for a short story submission. Like, I literally, when we got it, I was like, Everyone's Gay in Space. Like, man, I hope this is a good story. Because if it is, we're definitely publishing it. And so it's about a guy named something Junior.
Douglas Jr.
Douglas Jr., that's right. And he and his wife at some point found out when they were trying to have kids in their early 20s that they had a disease, because they were both recessive carriers of it, that their child would have a 1 in 4 chance of having this disease. And so they got tested for it, and they found out they had it. And they decided to donate their DNA for research to try and find a cure for the disease. Fast forward 20 years, and they get an oopsie letter from the scientists people that are like, hey, we made a mistake. You have a clone. In the process of trying to do research to figure out if we could genetically select this disease out of you. We couldn't help you, but we could make it so your children wouldn't have this disease by selecting it out of them. In that process, we created a clone of you. There was a mix-up in the paperwork. We're not entirely even sure you volunteered or wanted this, but it happened, and so you've got a clone. And so at first, the guy, Douglas Jr., is very excited to meet his clone. His wife is not very excited that they've got a clone that's 22 years old, I think, that he didn't know about. He goes to meet his clone in a coffee shop, and he thinks, I'm going to mentor him and help him, and I'm going to be the father he never had, or something like that. He sees himself in this role of filling a void or something. And it turns out that it doesn't go as planned. The son is in school as a straight A student, engineer, planning to be an astronaut. The father, I guess you could say, Douglas Jr., although he's not really a father, he is kind of a blue-collary, not very bright guy who is more sports-oriented and more, blue-collar. The son is not. The son is, top of his class, blah, 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 wants to be an astronaut, probably is going to get to do it. And then the reason that the episode is, the short story is called Everyone's Gay in Space, is you find out that the son is gay. And that really then becomes the focus of their interaction, is about the Douglas Jr., the older guy's sort of awkwardness related to it. And, him questioning, how can my clone be gay if I'm straight? And, it caused a lot of confusion for him And the clone is also probably doesn't handle it as well as possible. He's a little bit aggressive about the fact of the whole thing. You guys are looking at each other like you question that. But okay, at any rate, and that's sort of the end of it. And so the end of the story is they part ways and they're not going to become friends, and or have some like bonding moment. The dad. I'm just going to call him the dad because his name's Junior. Kind of confuses it. So the dad then goes to like a smut video thing, watches some gay porn just to see if he's aroused, decides he's not, watches some lesbian porn to see if he's aroused, decides he is, goes home, tells his wife the whole thing was a mistake and the guy wasn't really his clone. And then they decide, what do doctors know? And they have a kid, even though the doctor said there's a 1/4 chance that the kid would have this disease. And they're just like, whatever, we don't care. What do doctors know? Doctors don't know anything. Doctors said that kid was my clone, and clearly he's not because he's gay. And that's kind of where the story leaves off, I think. Did I leave anything out? Anyone? Or any key things out?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay.
They have a daughter at the very end.
At the very end.
Yeah,
Who
they
doesn't have the disease.
doesn't have the disease.
Right. Which in their mind is like proof that the doctors don't know anything.
Correct.
Oh, and at the very end of it, a week after the birth, the wife has some sickness or something, and the doctors do help her and save her life. So the doctors know some things sometimes, but not other times.
Right.
And so he has this weird split in his opinion of like sort of holding two totally separate ideas simultaneously.
Right. That really seems to be kind of where the story ends, is his internalizing of this idea that, these people are both wrong and right, this kind of Schrodinger scientist in a way, where, they're right sometimes when it's beneficial, but every other time they're wrong.
Yeah.
And then the tie-in with the title is the daughter at some point asks or says that she wants to be an astronaut. And his response is, you can't be an astronaut because they're all gay men.
Right. And then the mom is like, no, they're not. You can be an astronaut, honey.
Where'd you get that?
Right.
So that's the one thing I would say in your synopsis. When he mentions everyone in space is gay, is the fact that they didn't want anybody reproducing up in space. So they ended up, the majority of the people going to space were men. And so they ended up turning gay because that was the only option to them, or just as a thing they're known to being gay.
Yeah, the clone kid says like they tend to send gay men in space because you're up there for 9 months or something, and they don't want
several years.
Several years, yeah, and they don't want to access
several years.
And they don't want to have a kid born on the moon or wherever the space station is or whatever, because that would be a disaster.
Women would have been sterilized, but there's not that many women anyway that want to go into space, so it's kind of a non-issue.
Yeah.
But
yeah, the way he explains it is it's a pretty solid explanation for why this ends up happening, that everybody is gay in space.
Yeah, it's plausible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You actually kind of go, huh? Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
3 years? Yeah. See, but by that rationale, then the title could also be Everyone's Gay in a Submarine.
Or prison.
Everyone's gay in prison.
Everyone's gay. Like that's the big thing. But
right. So what did you guys think of the story? Things you liked or didn't like?
You go.
I overall, I really enjoyed the story. I kind of felt like it was a satisfying lecture that the son was giving his father, like everything that somebody who's had to explain their point of view and their lifestyle over and over again is probably like, yes, thank you for saying all of this,
Even though he didn't sign up to teach Queer 101.
I was just going to say that, yeah, especially where he says, you know what, I didn't sign up to teach Queer 101. Yeah, and like, stop bringing this up. Let's talk about other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the way all of that was written, his education of Douglas Jr., Patrick, the son is named Patrick, right?
Yeah.
His education of Douglas Jr. is pretty satisfying in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Because doesn't Douglas Jr. the dad say something like, well, why did you choose to be gay or something like that?
Yeah. That's kind of how it...
Right. Well, look, why did you choose to be straight?
Right.
Was his answer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. I feel like you're right. It is. It's an interesting way to have the conversation that probably every gay person has had to have with a straight person.
And it's also interesting talking points that you've read in like editorials and opinions of people. I don't know. I've heard a lot of these arguments before. It felt very familiar, and seeing them all placed into a single conversation this way,
Hmm.
it was a nice
And a conversation that doesn't seem forced. Like if I met my clone, these are the kind of questions I would have. Like, do we both like chocolate? Do we both like the
Right.
same
Mhm.
color? And then if he was like, oh, I'm gay, and I was like, huh, all right, that's interesting. That would have been a really interesting like that. But I have some sympathy for the dad. I keep calling him the dad, even though he's not the dad, because if I met my clone and my clone was gay, I'd be like, huh. Like I wouldn't be
Yeah, like
offended, but I
how
would pause.
right. It's an interesting, and they probably could have gone into this a lot more, an interesting exploration into the nature versus nurture idea of what makes us develop in one way or another. Um, just, an interesting idea. And I feel like they could have gone into that more in a story like this.
I think they do kind of go into that because Patrick absolutely says that it's not a choice. So it isn't nature versus nurture. It's just nature.
Right.
That's it.
Well, they mentioned there is some link in their genes, but it's not definitive. If you have this gene, you aren't officially gay, and if you don't have
Right.
this gene, you aren't 100% going to be straight. So he tries to explain there is maybe some science behind it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because the dad had asked,
Right.
had you had been checked for that gene? And the kid's like, no, there's no
It
reason.
doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Right.
Doesn't matter if I have or don't
Like
have
there
the
are
gay gene.
markers.
I'm gay.
Yeah, the kid
Yeah.
is, yeah, he obviously has no problem with accepting himself and who he is.
Yeah.
It's Douglas Jr., the dad, the
The donor.
the donor basically, who has the problem with it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is not my problem. Like, this is your problem to sort out. You're only upset about this because you're questioning your own sexuality now that you've discovered your clone is gay and open and happy about it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You questioning your sexuality is not my problem.
Right. And it's not my job to educate you on Queer 101. Like,
Right.
I'm sorry that I brought up these questions for you. You should probably go figure this out. Okay, so I'm just
For
curious.
yourself.
Yeah, right. So I'm curious. As soon as I read this again, and I didn't do this when I first read it, but now that I read it again, I had to know. Did any of you Google uh, if in the case of identical twins, if there's ever instances where one of them is gay and one of them is not?
Oh, no, I didn't.
No, I didn't. I feel like I've heard maybe. It didn't seem far-fetched when he brought that up as an argument.
Right. So spoiler. I mean, it doesn't whether the answer is yes or no. It doesn't affect the value of the story and the things it brings up. But I was just really
Right.
curious, and so I did a Google search. I'm like, is there ever like one gay and one straight twin? Turns out there are. And the next thing that they were like, well, maybe one of them is faking, or maybe one of them isn't out yet. And so they basically hooked up like blood flow monitors to their genitalia and had them look at gay and straight pornography to
Huh.
like measure blood flow and be like, nope, you're gay. Nope, you're straight. And so there's not like one of them is out of the closet and one of them isn't. And I was just like, wow, that like it never even occurred to me that that would be a study. But like, of course it would be. Like that's how you would, in theory, like add some clarity to this. Yeah, I don't know. It was super interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. There is a term for it,
Now
by the
I'll go
way.
look that up.
There is a
Yeah.
term for it, by the way, that I looked up. I don't remember the term, but basically, what they said in the study is they thought that that it is genetic. However, that it is they think it might be genetic that is turned on or off based on what hormones you get at what point in your gestation cycle. Is that right? Like when the baby's
Okay.
like growing, and so it's possible that one set of genes might be turned on and the other set of genes might not be, even in identical twins.
Okay.
That's their
That makes
theory,
sense.
but they haven't.
Right.
I didn't do enough research. At any rate, so I do want to get to a couple of these questions, unless you guys have other things that you were burning to.
I just
Yeah,
want to
jump
say,
in.
when I was reading the story, it felt like it was, granted, it's set in the future because obviously they've like colonized Mars and there's this crazy space travel. but it reminded me like as if it was written in the 1950s and 60s with the simplicity and the ideas that they held.
Of the questions that the guy
Of
asks.
the yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And the lack of knowledge about medical and those sort of things. So it was weird in that sense that it was like, okay, we're talking about the future, but the people seem stuck in like the 50s and 60s in their education and just acceptance of others.
Well, and they kind of make out the guy to
Douglas
be
Jr.
They make the guy Douglas Jr. to be kind of a simpleton, right? Like at the beginning of the story, he says, "If I have a kid, his name will be Junior, and his name will be Douglas Jr. Jr."
Exactly.
And his wife is like, "Do you mean the third?" And he's like, "Oh, is that what that means?"
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, oh my god,
Yeah.
no wonder you have these questions about being gay.
Right. The line on that actually is pretty good. He's like, something like it wouldn't be a junior. And he's like, man, why do people always have to steal my ideas?
Yeah,
Right.
But
I thought the line of... Sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
I just thought that was interesting in that it's a futuristic story, but told with characters that seem like they're stuck in the past. And as conservatives as they sound, it did shock me that the dad so willingly not only bought a ticket, but went to a theater, a public theater, and watched gay porn, both two men and then following it up with two women. The fact that he was willing to do that, I think showed maybe the clone, his quote unquote son, got to him a little bit to like actually watch it. Because I would never imagine the dad ever watched this ever. But it didn't seem like he was like repulsed by it. He was just like, oh, that does not stimulate me. It wasn't like he thought it was
horrified.
Correct. So I feel like that was kind of maybe a little peek into it, that he was at least willing to do that.
I don't think he was malicious. I don't think he was like mean. I think he was just confused and dumb. Kinda.
Yeah. But the fact that he was being so conservative in every other aspect for him to actually go and see for himself, I thought that was pretty awesome for him to have the courage to do that. But anyway,
I think that I think it probably illuminates the idea that instead of being disgusted by Patrick's lifestyle.
Hi, this is Colby, and you are listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. But you already knew that, didn't you? If you'd like to support what we do at After Dinner Conversation, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/After Dinner Conversation. That's right, for as little as $5 a month, you can support thoughtful conversations like the one you're listening to. And as an added incentive for being a Patreon supporter, you'll get early access to new short stories and ad-free podcasts, meaning you'll never have to listen to this blurb again. At higher levels of support, you'll be able to vote on which short stories become podcast discussions, and you'll even be able to submit questions for us to discuss during these podcasts. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being the kind of person that supports thoughtful discussion.
I think that I think it probably illuminates the idea that instead of being disgusted by Patrick's lifestyle and how he turned out, I guess, it wasn't his disgust with Patrick, it was his sudden shattering of his own beliefs about himself.
Yeah.
Maybe I am not who I thought I was.
Right.
And I think
maybe I'm gay and I just don't know it.
Right, exactly. And so that's why he went and did it. Maybe not because he's necessarily bigoted, but because he is suddenly upset that he isn't so sure about himself anymore.
Yeah.
I think
and he's got to go figure that out.
I think that's a big thing with homophobia is they feel threatened that someone else might hit on them, and what if I like it? What if a lady hits on me and I like it? I think that's a big part of it. So the fact that he was willing to go and experiment for himself and realize, oh, this isn't a threat, I won't be turned on by this. I think that may have changed to a degree how scary someone being gay can be to another person. Right.
What's just as a side note, you guys ever notice that it seems like the biggest people that are homophobes are always the ones who, like, 3 years later, you're like, caught having gay sex in a truck stop. Like, I don't know what that correlation is between, like, people that are way against gay people that turn out to be gay, but
it's become pretty reliable, though, hasn't it?
This is why I think Ashley might actually be a spider. Because she's so afraid of spiders.
No, 100% sure. No, no.
Well, just because you're so afraid of spiders and you're so repulsed by spiders, you might be a spider.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, pretty sure no. The other thing that I thought was interesting was just how imagine if you knew that you were a clone, and for
Oh,
Patrick to
yeah.
be
That's a good point.
not as interested in learning about the whatever his name is, Junior,
Yeah, the donor.
as much as vice versa, the father to the son. He was really confident in who he was. Patrick was very confident in who he was, himself as a person, his likes, his dislikes. He was like, let's not play games. We can just discuss them. I mean, I don't personally, if I knew I had a clone out there, I personally can see myself being more like the dad in the situation, being like, okay, what do we have in common? This is going to be so exciting.
What's your best 5K time?
Exactly.
That's what you'd want to know. Yeah.
Well, I would be fascinated by it, but the son is just very like.
I think that's related to his age too.
You
Like at
think?
22, I feel like your ego is like, I am me and I am amazing. Like, I don't know.
But to know you're a clone, though, I think that
Yeah.
goes to show also maybe generational differences,
Yeah.
and how they were raised and self
I would
confidence.
have a million questions. I would, if I ever if I found out I was a clone or that I had a clone, man, I'd have a million questions.
Well, there's an interesting line when he's talking about the Douglas Jr. thing, and he says, no matter what he did, it never turned out original. So what I was thinking about this line is, this clone is original.
Yeah.
Patrick is his own person.
Yeah.
And Douglas is really disappointed in that. So maybe he never really wanted anything original to begin with.
Oh, that's a good
or
point.
it's just
Yeah.
ironic that he's like,
It's definitely some
he's so
irony.
disappointed in this. Yeah.
That's a good point.
But that one line, I kind of went back and highlighted it because I was like, huh.
Let's look at it.
But he did do something.
Here, let's look at a few of our questions. Because I know when I wrote these questions like 6 months ago, whenever this was, I really tried to write questions that weren't related to the gay part of it, because I thought that was kind of the least interesting part of the story in some ways. I mean, not that it was bad. It was just like we're all pretty.
It's the most obvious.
It's the most obvious part of the story. So yeah. So first question is, if you found out you had a clone, would you want to meet them? And what would be your expectations about that clone? Or what questions would you have?
I would definitely want to meet them,
Yeah.
but I expectations, I don't know. I mean, I would definitely have a threesome with my clone, but that's not really an expectation.
Like, oh.
Well, I mean, here's the good thing about. We're just gonna go there, Jeremy. You brought it up. Here's the good thing about having a threesome with your clone. There's
You went right back to
You
the
already know what turns yourself on. You're good there.
and there's not that issue that guys have when it's a 2-guy, 1-girl threesome, where you're afraid the other guy is gonna pull down his pants, and you're gonna be like, "Oh, great. Now I look like a chump," because you know he's packing exactly what you're packing.
Oh my god.
It's an excellent point.
I was not expecting you to say that.
I was not either.
Wow. I learned something new about Jeremy today. Jeremy, we have found your long lost twin.
It's kind of a
Let's
shame
text
we're
him.
not doing video.
Get ready, Sarah.
This makes
I'm crying.
So I actually thought about we should start doing these with alcohol, and then I was like, no, it's like
Oh, like drunk history?
Yeah, but that was like 10 a.m. your time. I'm not sure you want to be drinking at 10 a.m. But maybe
We
Hey, you
would've had
can't
to get
drink
up
all
hours
day if
ago.
you don't start in the morning.
that is true. These might go better with a little bit of booze.
I am about to go grab a beer.
There you go.
After that.
Next one. So
I think it would be interesting to meet my clone, although I know how competitive I am. I would struggle. If I would definitely go to complete, like, compare, and competitiveness would kick in
Yeah.
for me. I would struggle with that. Because I would be like, you have every single gene that I do.
yeah.
I would struggle with that.
You know, oddly enough, I would definitely want to meet my clone too. And oddly enough, the thing I would want to know, and this is totally just me being a sciencey person, maybe, or I don't know, maybe competitive too, is I would want to know what came easy and what came hard for them, because I would want to know where I had sort of pushed the limits of my bell curve, and where I had not, like where I had some natural ability, but I never emphasized that aspect of my like studies or work. right? So if they came to me like this guy in the story and said, look, I'm really good at engineering and it's come really easy to me, I'd be like, okay, so
Untapped potential.
per hour spent, maybe I could like build up my stats on my math and engineering. I just didn't know it. And so instead I've
Right.
been like burning all my time trying to be a better musician when I've really sort of tapped out that end of the bell curve on my abilities.
Interesting.
So I maybe would just want to know where sort of the easy gains were, if that's as silly as it is.
I think the hard part though is learning those skills. Like say
You got to start with
say your clone is a phenomenal swimmer. Well, even if I start swimming now, I'm never going to be as good as my clone because that muscle memory when the child was growing and practice and like that's a skill you can't learn as an adult compared to someone that learned so young ago. But
Sarah, anything for you? Would you meet your clone? Is there anything you'd particularly be interested in?
Sure, I think I'd be interested in meeting my clone. I just don't think I would
Have sex with
I would
it?
have the expectation. Okay, that's not what I said. I said I don't think oh god. I don't think I would have the expectations that Douglas Jr. had.
Yeah.
I think I would go into it with a lot more curiosity about what our differences were rather than what our similarities were.
Yeah.
Right. I think that would be the most interesting.
Yeah, and I
interesting
guess
thing.
I would hope that we could be friends.
What are
and maybe like hang out together.
Well, because here's the thing.
But there wouldn't be this like wild expectation that they would be exactly like me.
That's the other thing I wondered too. Like, if I can't be clones with my friend, does that just mean I'm like a douchebag? Like, if I can't be friends with myself, like that's
No, do you ever hear like how people say they can't be friends with somebody because they're too similar? Have you ever heard that before?
right that you
Yeah.
hate the traits in others that you hate most in yourself?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I'm aware of
Yeah.
that, but I love myself, so that doesn't come up.
Okay, Colby. I don't know. I guess I have a few friends where we've become friends, but the beginning of our relationship was rocky, and like later on we realized that it was rocky because we were very similar. So our personalities in a social group were competing in a sense.
Yeah.
And it took us being kind of thrown in together in a situation where we could really get to know each other and talk, that we realized that we have a lot of common interests and actually share a lot and become friends.
Yeah.
So it's like a situation where you're meeting your clone, if your personalities were really that similar, it might have to be, you might have to give it some time.
Yeah. It's small
to
doses.
see if you were something like that. Yeah.
Would you guys be is it possible for you to be jealous of your clone? Like, if you met your clone and found out that your clone was like, CEO of a Fortune 500 company by 28 or something, or like did something
well, it's
amazing.
possible to be.
Yeah, I think it would probably not be jealous of things that they succeeded at that you're not interested in, but if they succeeded at things you're interested
God,
in
that's a great point.
and didn't do very well at or had never really focused on.
Yeah, so if you found out, like in your case, Jeremy, that if your clones were better musicians than you, that might sting a little
basically.
bit. Yeah.
You wouldn't want to hang out with them and like play music and
Oh,
get
yeah,
better,
no, still, yes.
because then
But there
you
would
have the
definitely be
potential
some
to get
jealousy
better.
there, like, and it's along the lines of kind of what you talked about, Colby, of, seeing where the pluses and minuses are.
What if I had tried harder
because
earlier?
it's a different,
Yeah.
exactly.
that's what I think. If you look at studies of twins, are that much more interesting because not only did they live during the same time period, but they had the same upbringing. Like they had the same experiences as children, the same parents, the same nature nurture, basically. And imagine if they both do the same activity and one twin does better than the other. I mean, you got to look at that and be like, man, we have the same genes, we have the same parents, we have the same upbringing. How am I lacking at this?
Do I just not try as hard as they do? Am I just a quitter compared to them?
That would be hard to.
Yeah.
That'd be hard to swallow.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just looking over our questions here really quickly. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Okay, so just going back, this will be our last question, since I think we've covered most of the other ones pretty well. Were there not in the story, but were there assumptions about the upbringing and backgrounds of the two characters that you brought it, that you're like, oh, this is why he's good at engineering, or this is why he is harder working? Like, did the success of the clone make you wonder about the upbringing of the clone or of Douglas Jr., the donor?
Absolutely.
Yes, I think that would be something really interesting to look at, in the same way they do studies of twins who are separated, where how the different upbringing affects them differently. So it would be a very similar exercise in the same way. It'd be really interesting to look at that. Again, in the plus and minus side, how did these external factors influence each one in different ways?
Yeah. Well, now that we talk about it more, and I didn't think about this at the beginning, but you're right. This story, even though it's a sciencey story in clones, it could just as well be two identical twins meeting as adults for the first time. Or
The one interesting factor about adding the clone in there is you're talking about different generations.
yeah.
So you're talking
well.
about the dad who grew up in a completely different generation. Like, what would have been like in the 1960s if I was born then versus
if you were born 30 years earlier.
or later? Like, what if I was born in this generation of having internet? I grew up without internet. Like, it wasn't a thing. It wasn't around. We didn't have computers in our homes. Like, what if I grew up 15 years later than I am now and was born in year 2000 or whatever? Crazy different experience.
Well, that's a really good point.
There's also like the idea that Patrick was probably born to a family that was in a different socioeconomic class than Douglas may have been brought up in, because who's got the money to buy an embryo,
buy a clone?
And I mean, or to participate in one of these studies, and it kind of seems like maybe Patrick was set up differently,
set up to succeed
in life than Douglas was.
Yeah, so maybe it
maybe
both says something about their upbringing as well as sort of the economic opportunities of each of their culture, of their society.
And also a more open-minded, I don't know, if you're participating in studies where you're taking embryos and implanting them, you're probably not from the same philosophical background as Douglas is.
Yeah, they were like,
as Douglas Jr.
Right, they were
is,
conservative,
because
but
they
not
didn't
religious.
believe in any of that.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. So there's a lot of differences in probably the way that they were brought up.
Yeah.
One of the questions that one of the topics that was not discussed in the questions was, I feel bad for them because they did donate to bring forth science and to cure a disease that had killed two of their cousins. And for science to be reckless with the data and abuse it, that I don't know how I would feel about that. If I was literally trying to help save people's lives and then to turn around and find out that they made a clone of me, I would be furious.
And they're like, oops, clerical error.
I would be furious,
Right,
like the wife in this story. I mean, there's so many times now in science where, we have study participants or donating my body for science or, and who knows, I mean, you hope they're doing the right thing in science, but it's not always how it goes.
Yeah.
Right, and they really, in the story, the scientists wrote it off as a oopsie.
Right, they almost made a
these
joke
things
about
happen.
it, right? They were like, It's like those times when you think you're getting a white baby and it turns out it's black. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to consider we voluntarily do like the Ancestry DNA, send in a cheek swab, and Ancestry's like, we're going to do the right thing with your DNA. Don't worry about it. It's like, all it takes is one slip up, and who knows what they're going to use that for. I mean,
and then they turn it over to the police.
Right, then it gets turned over to the police. Yeah. I want to say
I felt really bad for his wife.
Yeah, agreed.
I felt really bad for her. Clearly, he did not like her very much.
Yeah.
Or he lacked the depth of emotion to be able to have feelings for her beyond making fun of her all the time, like inwardly. But he did say that he doesn't want, because she was upset because Patrick basically doesn't have a mother. He's a copy of Douglas Jr.
Yeah.
And so she was like, you don't even need me. You want me to be invisible. And he says that Douglas does not want his wife to disappear. But he just kind of he's like emotionally unavailable for her.
Yeah.
And she's really upset. She's like really high strung, and she really wants to experience being a mother and go through childbirth, but she's unable to reconcile like what that would mean.
Yeah.
Well, I bet she feels threatened. They're now in a world where you don't need females to reproduce. You're not allowing females to have that experience, or the ability of them to experience giving birth and carrying a child. Seems like that's soon going to become obsolete because they can just do clones. They can just select those individuals with certain traits and be like, you want a child? Here's your clone, instead of going through the process themselves. Imagine if all women were like, no, we're no longer going to have you give birth. Everyone just gets clones now of the best
So
people.
it's funny you should mention that.
Right, because childbirth is incredibly dangerous. So,
Yeah.
like, why not just cut that whole process right out, you know?
So I feel like she feels threatened. Her biological wanting to go through this process is threatened. And so by him approving that process, even though her husband is a clone, her approving of that process and wanting to go forward with it was, I would think, a direct threat to her. Like, are I just creating more of these clones, and then soon enough, my duty, my wants, my desires to give birth become obsolete. It's no longer an option.
Well, and she's trying to have the conversation with her friends early on in the story, and they're not incredibly supportive.
No.
It kind of seems like most people in the story treat her like she's dumb.
Yeah.
And the points her friends are making in the card club game, they're valid points, but she's expressing a real sadness at not being able to do this, and a real like conflict in her brain about, should I just go ahead and have a baby and risk it with this genetic disease?
Yeah.
You know,
but
nobody's really willing to enter that discussion with her. They just kind of go, well.
But I think that also, I thought that was relatively. We need to wrap it up here too. But I thought that was relatively consistent with the sort of a level of emotional maturity of Douglas Jr. and sort of their sort of socioeconomic status, like his lack of sophistication and understanding her frustrations. I think were very consistent with his lack of understanding in general, right? His sort of a lack of emotional maturity and all of these things. I think they all tied together pretty consistently.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll wrap it up there. You've been listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. We have podcasts that you should like and subscribe, like this one. We have short stories. We have anthologies. They're all on Amazon and Kobo and Barnes and Noble and everywhere you can possibly look now. We have a monthly magazine. We have a website. What is that website, Ashley?
AfterDinnerConversation.com.
There you go. And yeah. Oh, and we also have Patreon. And so we have quite a few Patreon subscribers now as well. If you just go to patreon.com/AfterDinnerConversation. Thank you, Jeremy and Sarah, for your insights. And this next one, we are going to have beers. You guys do what you want, but there's going to be alcohol on this side of the line. All right. Bye.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed listening to this, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. You know, the vast majority of people haven't liked and subscribed, which means maybe it shows up in your algorithm, maybe it doesn't. So don't leave that to chance. Just go ahead and hit that button, and we'd sure appreciate that. And that way we can keep doing what we're doing, and you're not left to the whims of some algorithm. Thanks.